Have you ever wanted to create a podcast but didn't know where to begin? How do you create an audio or video file? How do you set up an RSS feed? What kind of hardware or software do you need? How do you publish it to iTunes? I'm going to cover all that and more on this next episode of My Apple Podcast. Okay, everyone, for this episode, I'm going to take you from start to finish on how to create a podcast. First, you have to decide what kind of podcast do you want to set up. Do you want to create an audio file? Do you want to create a video file? You can also even attach PDFs. But audio and video is basically the way you want to go. For this demo, I'm going to create a video slideshow. I'm going to add chapter markers to that file. It will then become the enclosure for my RSS feed, which I'll show you how to create. Going to publish it to iTunes. I'm then going to sync that file to my iPhone and play it back for you so you can see how it works. If you're ready, let's begin. As I showed you in the previous episode, you can set up a video file by using Keynote. I basically set up 4 or 5 title slides with 3 images in between. I'm going to use those slides as chapter markers when I import it into GarageBand. So I have all my animations and transitions set up. So I'm going to go ahead and export this file, and I'm going to save it as a movie file with a fixed timing of 4 seconds per frame. Now when you export a video file from Keynote, it's going to save it as a .movie file. .movie files are not appropriate for podcasts, so we want to convert that file. For my purposes, I'm going to use Leo Video Converter for the Mac. It will be able to convert this .mov file to an MP4 file, which will be appropriate for my next step, which is to import that video file into GarageBand to set up markers. So you basically go to Edit, Profile, and then choose your settings. I'm going to choose the setting that is provided by the iPhone 4 settings. I like the resolution that's available, so I'm going to click OK, and then click the button in the bottom right to initiate the conversion process. Okay, once you have converted your file, you're going to go ahead and start a new project in GarageBand. And you're going to choose not podcast, but movie, because we're working with a video file. And once you open it up, you import your video into the stage. And you begin to set up markers. You'll notice on the bottom left, there is a button that says Add Marker. And you're going to add those markers where you want them to appear in your video. Since I have slides already set up, I'm just going to add markers at the beginning and then subsequently throughout the presentation where I have my title slides. And when I'm done, I'm going to have 4 markers added to my project. You can also add URL titles and or URL addresses. Okay, I just exported my video file and this is what it looks like. As you can see along the bottom, there's the hyperlink that I set up in GarageBand, and to the bottom right are all the chapters that I set up. These chapters will show up when you import this into your podcast feed. So the next thing you want to do is set up your feed. Rather than go through and write out your entire RSS feed from scratch, there are actually tools at your disposal that will help do this for you. One way to do it is using Feeder, which is available in the Mac App Store. Feeder basically allows you to set up a new feed and then add all the items associated with that feed as long as you want to do that. And it's pretty easy. You just start out by clicking New Feed, then choosing the podcast that you want to set up, in this case iTunes Podcast, and then entering in your title, the website, the description, the categories. And you can do that by just hitting the plus sign and all the categories that are related to your podcast. And when you're done filling in all the fields, click Create. And I'm not going to do that because I've actually already created one on the top left. You then proceed by adding items. Items are what fall underneath the channel. The channel is the main body of information. The items are what you add to your channel. And every time you add a new episode to your podcast, it becomes a new item. And you do that by clicking New Item. And then you fill in all the information that pertains to that new item, including the enclosure that is associated with that item, that is, in this case, the video file. Down below, you'll add a description, subtitle, and summary. And all that will go into the feed. So I'm going to double click on what I've already created so you can see what my information looks like. And when I click on iTunes Podcasting, you can see some of the initial settings that I already set up. This is just a plain little button that I set up just for demo purposes, which will be the button that will be identified when people search for your podcast in iTunes. I'm not going to actually publish this, so I didn't create anything that's fancy. Just to let you know that all these tools are at your disposal and it's very easy to set it up. Once all your information has been completed, you go to File and Save As, and it will save it as an XML file. Or if you don't want to publish through, say, Dreamweaver like I'm using, and you want to go straight to publishing, you can just go to File and Publish, enter in your FTP information, and you can publish it straight to your server from Feeder. And this is what the XML file looks like when I open it up in Dreamweaver. And as you can see, you have basically 3 parts of information. Up top, you have the XML and RSS standard information that's needed before you even proceed with setting up your podcast. That information along the top is important to include. Section 2, channel. That's basically the main information. What is your podcast? What is it about? What's the title? Who's the author? What's the description? What's the language? Who's the author? What are the keywords? Etc., etc. And this is also where you add information for your iTunes image, which would be how you promote your podcast. And then subsequently, every episode that you set up will be listed as an item. And this item will then include the title of each individual podcast, the links associated with it, the descriptions, the enclosure, which is the video file and or audio file that you're creating, or PDF if you want to include that, and all the other related information. And then you'll close out that section by adding the closing tags for the item, the channel, and then finally the RSS feed. Okay, let's test our feed to see if it's actually working. Now I've already went through the trouble of uploading the feed as well as the enclosure, that is the video file. So they're both now on my server. Now I'm going to go ahead and test the feed to see if it actually works. I'm going to go to iTunes and I'm going to click Podcast. And I'm going to click Submit a Podcast on the top right. Then I'm going to go ahead and type in my feed. So I'm calling My Demo Podcast / My Demo Podcast.xml. I'm going to click Continue. Oh, got to enter my password. And let's see if my feed is okay. Well, my feed is okay, and there is my iTunes image that will be my identification for my podcast. And if I'm ready to proceed, then I click Submit, and my iTunes podcast has been accepted. Now, I'm not going to do that because I'm doing this for demo purposes, so I'm going to cancel. However, now that it's been verified that my feed does work, there's another way to test out your feed. You open up iTunes, and you go to Advanced. And then you'll see an option that says Subscribe to Podcast. You select that, and then you type in your feed in this space as well. So, Timothy Paul Brown, My Demo Podcast / My Demo Podcast.xml. And as you can see, the feed does work because not only did it read the XML file, but the enclosure that I attached to that feed is now downloading to my iTunes library. So now let's go ahead and sync my iPhone to the file that has been downloaded to my iTunes library to see how it plays back on my iPhone. Okay, my podcast is now synced to my iPhone. So let's go ahead and play it back and see what it looks like. Now, one thing you're going to notice that's different than the way a video normally plays back is that you actually now have a menu option on here, and it's to the left of the player controls. So when you hit that menu, you notice that now you have the option to choose the different chapters that you set up in GarageBand. So instead of starting from the beginning, you can say, for example, go to chapter 3 and start there rather than at the beginning. And that's the advantage of having chapters set up in your podcast, particularly your video podcast. This can also be applied to audio as well. That's how it's done. I hope this episode was helpful. If you want to learn more about how to do this, go to myapplepodcast.com/podcastdemo.html, and I will have several files that you can download that gives you more information about how to set up your feeds, how to set up your podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. My name is Tim Brown. I'll see you next time.